My name's Harper, I'm 19, and for the past 5 years, I've basically been a glorified housemaid/nanny in the same house I used to feel safe in. If someone made a horror film about emotional manipulation wrapped in a suburban picket fence family, this place would be the setting. It started after my dad remarried. His new wife, Celeste, came with a dazzling smile and Pinterest-worthy lasagna, and he fell for her in about a week. Me? I was 15, still grieving my mom, still figuring out how to do makeup without looking like a raccoon. I didn't have the energy to play happy family, but I tried for him. I really did. Celeste had 2 kids from a previous relationship, Kellen, who was 10 at the time, and Daisy, 7. At first, they seemed okay. A little loud, a little clingy, but nothing unbearable. I didn't realize I was about to become their full-time babysitter. The first few months after the wedding were manageable. Celeste played the perfect stepmom card in front of my dad, making cookies, planning game nights, hugging me in front of guests like we were bonded for life. But it didn't take long for the curtain to fall. About a year in, everything shifted. Celeste stopped pretending. Suddenly, I was the built-in babysitter. She'd text me at school, Daisy needs help with her diorama. Or worse, Kellen forgot his lunch. Again, she knew I had finals that week. Didn't matter. Celeste always had an excuse, her back, her headaches, her exhaustion from her part-time bookkeeping gig that she somehow turned into a 24/7 excuse to do absolutely nothing at home. And my dad? He used to be present. Used to take me to practice, show up at my school plays with flowers, cook pancakes on Sundays. But the more time he spent around Celeste, the more he faded out. I'd try to talk to him about how unfair everything felt, but he'd say things like, "She's trying, Harper," or "You've got to be more patient with your new family." As if I hadn't been sacrificing my entire teenage experience just to keep the peace in this makeshift home. By my junior year, I was missing clubs, hanging out less, and falling asleep in class because I'd been up all night with Daisy's stomach bug while Celeste rested. My guidance counselor pulled me aside once and asked if everything was okay at home. I told her I was just tired. What else could I say? My stepmom treats me like a servant, and my dad turned into a ghost? Yeah, that'd go over well. My senior year was the final blow. College applications, SATs, all of it just blurred into noise because I was too busy running Celeste's household. She'd leave her lists on the fridge like she was running a sorority house and I was pledging for life. If I missed one thing, say, forgot to wipe down the baseboards, she'd guilt-trip me for days. I just want to live in a clean home, Harper. Is that too much to ask? Meanwhile, she watched true crime documentaries all day and complained about how stressed she was. And Kellen and Daisy? They became experts at weaponized helplessness. Kellen once pretended he didn't know how to tie his shoes for 2 straight weeks until I figured out he just liked the attention. Daisy cried if I told her she couldn't have cookies before dinner, and Celeste would swoop in like I'd committed a felony. "You don't get to discipline my children," she'd whisper through gritted teeth. Her kids, right? That line got clearer every year. When graduation came around, I didn't even feel proud. I was too numb. My dad gave me a tight hug and said, "I'm proud of you, kid," but I didn't believe it. I took a gap year, not because I wanted to, but because I had no bandwidth left to plan my own future. I started working part-time at a cafe and secretly opened a separate account to save for moving out. That's when Celeste started hinting that now that I was an adult, I needed to contribute more. She said it casually, like she was doing me a favor. "Rent's not cheap, you know. $150 a month won't kill you." She said this while holding a Vinny caramel macchiato and wearing a $300 sweater she claimed was on sale. It only got worse. She doubled the amount after 2 months, saying I was eating too much and using the hot water like we lived in a spa. I tried to talk to Dad, but he just blinked at me like he wasn't sure whose side he was supposed to be on. Spoiler, it wasn't mine. I started lying just to get a break. Said I had work shifts that didn't exist. Took the long way home to sit in the park with my earbuds in. Anything to avoid going back. Then something snapped. It was a Thursday. I'd planned a night out with 2 friends, Liv and Maya. We hadn't hung out in forever, and I was excited. I bought this outfit from a thrift store I loved, cleaned the house before Celeste could complain, and even arranged for Maya to drive so I wouldn't have to borrow the car. I told Celeste a week in advance. She barely acknowledged it. But 2 hours before I was supposed to leave, she came into my room with that fake smile plastered on her face and said, "I forgot. I have a client meeting tonight. I need you to stay with the kids." I stared at her. "You said you didn't have anything this week." She shrugged. "It just came up." You know how it is. Real estate waits for no one. She even winked. No, I said flatly. I have plans. She narrowed her eyes. Well, I guess you'll have to cancel. Or are you saying your night out is more important than your family? I didn't answer. I just clenched my jaw, trying not to cry. She left before I could respond, calling out over her shoulder, "Make sure Daisy brushes her teeth this time, not just pretends." I collapsed onto my bed and stared at the ceiling, willing myself not to scream. My phone buzzed, Maya asking when I'd be ready. I told her I wasn't going. Again. She texted back. She did it again, didn't she? I was about to reply when a new message came in. From Liv. It said, "Let's follow her." At first, I thought it was a joke. But then my eyes widened. Because this wasn't the first time Celeste had pulled this client meeting stunt. And every time, she came home late, smelling like perfume and wine, with her blouse slightly wrinkled and a smirk she tried to hide. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. "Do it," I typed. And just like that, everything began to unravel. I stayed behind, babysitting like always, but this time I wasn't just resigned, I was seething and focused. I microwaved leftover pasta for the kids, sat them down in front of some cartoon with talking animals, and kept checking my phone while pretending everything was fine. At 6:55 p.m., Celeste left the house. Hair curled, lipstick sharp, heels too high for any real estate meeting. She barely glanced at the kids, just tossed it, "Don't forget bedtime is at 8, over her shoulder like she was heading to Pilates instead of lying to our faces. I watched from the living room window as her white BMW purred out of the driveway and turned left, toward downtown. 2 minutes later, Liv's text came in. "We're on her. Maya's driving. I'll update." I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then my phone buzzed again. "She's pulling into the parking garage at the Indigo Hotel. You were right. There's no open house here tonight, unless they're selling penthouse suites to secret boyfriends." I felt a rush of something cold and electric shoot up my spine. "Want us to go in?" "Yes," I texted, my fingers trembling. The next update came 15 minutes later. "She's at the hotel bar. With a guy. Tall, beard, mid-30s, navy suit, no wedding ring. They're laughing like it's a date. Ordering drinks now." I felt like I was floating outside my own body. Not surprised. Not even angry yet. Just detached. Like I was watching a story unfold that I already knew the ending to. This was the kind of confirmation you don't want but need. A quiet, brutal, "I told you so," echoing inside your bones. Then Liv sent the photo. It was grainy but unmistakable. Celeste with her hand on some stranger's knee, leaning in. Her face lit up with that particular smile she saves for when she thinks no one's watching. The smile I hadn't seen directed at anyone in our house in years. "She's cheating," Liv wrote. I just stared at the screen. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something. But mostly, I felt tired. Exhausted. Because this woman had spent the last 4 years tearing me down, weaponizing guilt and family to keep me tethered to her kids and her house like a live-in employee. She made me feel like I owed her. Like my existence in her world was transactional. And now here she was, sipping cocktails with some mystery man while I picked Cheerios out of the carpet and scrubbed crayon off the walls. And then Liv's next message came. "You won't believe this. Maya just recognized the guy. He used to work with your dad." My blood ran cold. I messaged back fast. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, his name's Chase something. Maya said he worked at your dad's old firm. He's been at a new one for a year or so, but she remembers him from some holiday party." Small world. Huh? I could barely breathe. She wasn't just cheating. She was cheating with someone who used to work beside my dad. Someone he probably shook hands with. Maybe even had over for lunch. It wasn't an affair, it was a betrayal with layers. A chessboard where she was playing both sides and assumed I'd never learn the rules. I didn't respond for a while. I got the kids through bath time and bedtime on autopilot. Daisy asked if Mommy would come in and say goodnight. I lied and said she was working late. I tucked her in and kissed her forehead, then went back to my room and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I started writing. I drafted a letter to my dad. Not a passive-aggressive note, not a list of complaints. Just the truth. Everything I hadn't said in 4 years. About how I watched him fade into Celeste's shadow. About how I missed the version of him who showed up and looked me in the eyes. About how I wasn't angry that he fell in love again. I was angry he let that love turn him into someone who couldn't see his own daughter drowning. About how I was done being quiet. I attached the photo Liv sent at the bottom and saved it all in a draft. I wasn't sure when I'd send it, but I knew I would. Eventually. Meanwhile, Liv and Maya stayed on the case. Around 9:30, they sent another picture, Celeste and her client, leaving the hotel bar together, walking toward the elevator, hand in hand like they were in some rom-com. Except they weren't heading to a room to share secrets and laughter. They were heading to a room to destroy whatever scraps of trust my dad still had left in her. An hour later, Liv texted, "Her car's still in the garage. Guess she's staying the night." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't let myself do in a while. I started packing. Not in a dramatic, stomping around the room way. Quietly. Methodically. I took the emergency suitcase I kept under my bed, the one I always told myself was for someday, and I started folding clothes into it. I tucked in my headphones, my charger, my copy of the bell jar, the necklace my mom gave me on my 12th birthday. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just moved with the kind of calm that comes after a hurricane passes through. By midnight, I was lying on my bed, suitcase zipped, phone beside me. Then it buzzed again. This time it was Celeste. "Hey sweetie, heading home in the morning. Thanks for watching the kids. I owe you one." I stared at the screen. Then I took a screenshot. Because this woman didn't know it yet. But that casual, cheery lie she just typed? That was going to cost her everything. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from stress, just anticipation. For the first time in years, I felt like I had some kind of control. I'd been playing by their rules for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to hold the cards. And now, suddenly, I had a full hand. I was up before anyone else in the house. The sun hadn't even broken through the clouds yet, and the street outside was still blanketed in that soft, gray-blue light that makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. I made coffee in silence, sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me. I didn't even sip it. I just waited. At 7:12 a.m., my dad came downstairs. He looked groggy, eyes puffy from sleep, hair flattened on one side like he'd slept restlessly. He blinked at me when he saw I was already dressed. "You're up early," he said, his voice rough. I gave a small shrug. "Didn't sleep well." He nodded and went about making toast, the way he always does, peanut butter on one slice, butter and honey on the other. Same as he used to make for me when I was 10. It hit me then, how much had changed since those mornings. And how much hadn't. 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of Celeste's key in the door. I didn't even turn around. I didn't have to. She breezed into the house like it was any other Saturday morning. Same red dress from last night. Makeup a little smudged. Hair tousled in that effortless way that only ever looks effortless if you've been doing something scandalous. She paused when she saw me. "Oh, you're up." I turned to face her. "So are you." She gave a weak smile, like she wasn't sure what I knew or how to play it. "My client's dinner ran way late." I crashed on Melissa's couch. "Hope the kids weren't too much." I didn't respond. My dad came in from the kitchen holding his mug. He looked from me to Celeste, then back again. "Melissa's your coworker, right?" I asked her casually. Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Yes." "Why?" I tilted my head. "What's her last name again?" She blinked. "What?" "Melissa. Your coworker. What's her last name?" "Why does it matter?" I gave her a slow smile. "Just curious." She glanced at my dad, but he wasn't coming to her rescue. He looked confused, watching her with a slight crease in his brow. "Harper, what's going on?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just pulled out my phone and opened the folder Liv had made last night. It was titled Red Dress Lies because Liv has a flair for drama. I clicked on the first image, the one of Celeste at the hotel bar with Mr. Navy suit, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. I handed the phone to my dad, and his expression slowly changed as he scrolled. His face didn't erupt. He didn't shout or scream. Instead, he went stone cold. Silent. His hands didn't even shake, which almost made it scarier. By the time he hit the video of Celeste kissing the guy outside the hotel, he looked like he'd swallowed something toxic. Celeste's voice cracked the silence. "Where did you get that?" she snapped, stepping forward. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that's the first thing you want to know?" Not, "That's not what it looks like," or even a half-hearted denial. She turned to my dad, her tone shifting in that manipulative lilt I'd heard 100 times. "It's not what it looks like, Ben. He's a client. It got a little flirty, but nothing happened." My dad held up a hand. "Stop." That one word, low and flat, froze her mid-sentence. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just looked at her and said, "You lied. To both of us." I didn't mean for it to. Save it. It was the most authority I'd heard in his voice in years. Celeste's eyes flicked between us like she was trying to figure out which direction to run in. Harper, you shouldn't have been spying. No, I interrupted, voice sharp. You shouldn't have been cheating. Her lips tightened, but she didn't respond. My dad turned and walked into the kitchen. I heard him open the drawer where we kept all the important stuff: warranties, extra keys, copies of bills. He returned with an envelope and calmly began pulling out receipts, papers, and one of those real estate flyers she used to leave all over the house when she wanted him to brag to his friends about her deals. Then he added the phone I'd just handed him on top. Take your things, he said, and go. The silence that followed was heavy. What? Celeste gasped. You're kicking me out. He didn't even look at her. You can come back when you have a lawyer. Until then, I want you out. Her face twisted into a sneer. You're just going to believe her? After everything I've done for this family? I let out a short, humorless laugh. You mean like turning me into your unpaid servant? Gaslighting Dad into ignoring me? Or maybe it's the cheating that really sealed your great mom status? Her nostrils flared. You little brat. My dad cut in. Don't speak to her like that. Ever again. That stunned her into silence. And it stunned me, too, for a second. He looked at me, then. Not like I was a burden. Not like I was a distraction or an obligation. He looked like he saw me again, for the first time in years. I swallowed hard and looked away. Celeste packed in a rage. She muttered curses under her breath, slammed drawers, called someone, maybe the guy from last night, then grabbed a duffel bag and left. I watched from the front window as her car peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing, and then she was gone. I expected relief, and I felt it, but it was tangled up with 1,000 other things: grief, exhaustion, even a little guilt. Not for exposing her, but for how long I let her win before I fought back. I sat down on the couch and tried to breathe. My dad stood awkwardly for a minute before finally lowering himself onto the armchair across from me. I didn't know, he said quietly. I know, I whispered. That was the problem. He nodded, slowly. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. Then he asked, Are you still leaving? I nodded. I have to. For me. He hesitated, then said, Can I help you pack? That cracked something in me. A fissure in all the bitterness I'd built up over the years. I didn't cry, but I let him come upstairs and sit on the bed while I folded clothes into my suitcase. He didn't say much, just watched. But it was something. When I was almost done, I turned to him and said, You need to be better. For them. For Kellen and Daisy. His jaw clenched, and he nodded. I will be. And for the first time, I believed him. The drive to Elena's house was one of the longest and most surreal moments of my life. The car ride itself wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes, but every second felt like it stretched out, like I was passing through a different version of myself, one that had been trapped for so long, just barely holding on, and was now stepping into a world of possibilities. When we pulled into her driveway, I barely looked back. I had no reason to. Everything I was leaving behind, the house, the lies, the manipulation, was suddenly someone else's problem. Elena's parents greeted me like I was already part of the family. They didn't ask any questions, didn't prod, just welcomed me into their home with warm smiles and a home-cooked dinner. I almost felt guilty for not feeling more guilty. I didn't miss Celeste. I didn't even miss my dad. Not yet, anyway. I was too tired to miss anyone. That night, as I lay in the cozy bed in the room Elena's mom had set up for me, I didn't know what the next day would bring. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, with my future, with this newfound freedom I wasn't sure how to handle. But for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. No more looming threats of Celeste's demands, no more silence from my dad, no more hiding in my room, pretending I was just fine. The next few days passed in a blur of small victories. Elena's family treated me like I mattered. Her mom made sure I ate every meal. Her dad took me out for coffee to talk about the future. They were the kind of people who didn't make you feel like a burden for needing help. They just helped. And it was more than I ever got from Celeste. By the time the weekend rolled around, I'd been to 2 job interviews, sent out a few college applications, and even managed to get some sleep for once. I was starting to find myself again. Slowly. In pieces. But I was putting myself back together. Then my phone buzzed. It was from my dad. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear whatever excuse or explanation he was going to give me. But after a few minutes, I opened the message. Harper, I'm sorry. I need to see you. Can we talk? I stared at the words for a while. My finger hovered over the screen. I knew I should respond, but I didn't know how to answer. Part of me was angry, part of me was relieved, and part of me just wanted to pretend none of it ever happened. I couldn't ignore him forever, though. As much as I resented him for letting things get this bad, I knew I still cared about him. Deep down, I still wanted my dad. Not the version of him Celeste had molded, but the one who used to make me laugh and take me on surprise trips to the ice cream parlor after school. I replied, "I'll be at the park at noon." I didn't hear back. I didn't need to. When I got there, my dad was sitting on a bench near the playground, his head down, hands on his knees. He looked older somehow, more tired. Like he hadn't been sleeping either. But there was something else, too, a quiet, raw kind of guilt radiating off of him. I sat beside him, not saying anything for a long time. I wasn't sure how to start this conversation. He wasn't the one who'd abandoned me, after all. That was Celeste. But he was the one who let her push me to the sidelines. He was the one who let me be invisible in my own home. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I know you're angry," he said, his voice cracking a little. "I can't blame you. I should have seen it sooner. Everything. The way she treated you, the way I just let it happen." I wanted to tell him I'd been angry for years, that I'd felt invisible, unimportant, like a ghost in my own house. But I didn't. I didn't want to make him feel worse. I already knew he was hurting. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice quieter. "I should have put you first. I should have seen what was happening." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hear those words and feel like everything would be okay. But I didn't. I knew better. Because words are just words. They don't fix the damage. They don't undo the years of frustration, of watching him choose her over me. "I can't go back and fix it, Harper," he said, his voice low. "But I'll try. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right with you." I wanted to believe him. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not after everything. "I'm not coming back home," I said quietly. "I can't. Not with her still there." He nodded, his eyes downcast. "I understand. I just want you to know. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something. It was the first step toward us, maybe, rebuilding whatever had been lost. But it wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't going to make everything better. Not yet." I stood up, brushing the dirt off my jeans. "Thank you for coming," I said, even though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. "I'll keep in touch. Just take care of yourself." He nodded, his eyes still on the ground. And that was it. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. We just parted ways, and I walked back to my car, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settling in my chest. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. But I wasn't angry anymore, either. Not in the way I was when I first left. I was just tired. The next few weeks passed like that, quiet, introspective. I spent time with Elena and her family. I applied for more jobs, more schools. I was starting to find my footing again, starting to imagine a future outside of that house I'd been trapped in for so long. A future that was mine, and mine alone. And as much as I wanted to cut ties completely with my dad and his new life, I knew I couldn't. He was still my dad. The man who'd been there for me before everything went wrong. I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back to each other. One step at a time, the days blurred into weeks. The days I spent at Elena's house were peaceful, like I'd stepped into a different world, one where I could be myself, where I wasn't defined by the chaos of my family. I started working at a coffee shop near her house, and it was surprisingly fulfilling. The hours were good, the pay was better than the mall job, and the customers were all kinds of interesting. I even got a small apartment lined up with a couple of roommates I'd met at work. Things were finally moving in a direction where I felt like I was in control. But there were still moments when everything hit me like a wave, like when I'd see a message from my dad pop up on my phone. Or when a memory of Celeste would sneak up on me, those small moments when I remembered just how much she had managed to warp everything in my life. Those memories weren't fading as fast as I thought they would. I was free, but I was still bruised. One afternoon, after my shift, I met up with Maya and Liv at a small park near my new place. We were all sitting on a bench, talking about what was next. Maya had been applying for a new job, and Liv had gotten into a couple of schools out of state. Everyone seemed to be moving forward, but I was still stuck on something that I hadn't dealt with yet, but I knew was coming. I pulled my phone out of my bag and checked the notifications, trying to pretend I wasn't scanning for a text from my dad. I hadn't heard from him in a few days, and I was starting to get that feeling in my gut that he was planning something. It was that quiet, patient kind of pressure he used to apply when he didn't know how to handle things. And then, as if on cue, his name lit up the screen. Harper, I know we've barely talked since everything went down, but I need to ask something. I hope you'll understand. Can we meet? My heart rate picked up. I stared at the message for a few seconds. I should have just left it. I should have ignored it like I had before. But something inside me, a deep, uncomfortable need, drove me to reply. Where and when? His response was almost immediate. Meet me at the cafe where we used to go on Sundays. 10 a.m. tomorrow. It wasn't just any cafe. It was our cafe. The one my mom used to take me to. The one my dad and I would frequent when he had the time to spend with me and not his wife or her kids. The thought of walking into that place again, especially after everything, hit me harder than I anticipated. But I said yes. I had to know what he wanted. And maybe, just maybe, I needed the closure. Or the confrontation. The next morning, I was up early, the whole night's sleep slipping away as soon as I opened my eyes. I knew this was a mistake. I could feel it in my bones. But I couldn't stop myself. I dressed in something casual, something neutral, and made my way to the cafe. When I arrived, my dad was already sitting at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept, like he'd been holding on to something for days. His face was more lined than I remembered, and his eyes had that same defeated look they had the night Celeste left. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. I could tell. He stood when he saw me, and for a second, he looked like the dad I used to know. The one who had time for me. The one who tried his best. Harper, he said, his voice soft. Thank you for coming. I didn't sit down right away. Instead, I just looked at him, waiting for him to explain why he had dragged me here. Why, after everything that had happened, he thought we could just pretend like things weren't broken. He motioned to the chair across from him, and after a long, heavy silence, I sat down. He wasn't going to get away with the small talk. He needed to hear what I was feeling, what I had been feeling for the last 5 years. I'm not here to make excuses, he said, breaking the silence. I can't change what happened. I know I should have been there for you more. And I should have seen what was going on with Celeste. His voice cracked a little. But I didn't. And I regret that. I've been thinking about it a lot. I stared at him, not sure how to react. The hurt was still fresh. I could still hear the way his silence had felt when I needed him the most. The way he just let her take control of our lives without ever saying a word. But there was something in the way he was talking now that made me pause. A sincerity I hadn't heard before. It wasn't enough, but it was something. You don't have to apologize, Dad, I said quietly. You didn't see it. I get it now. You were so wrapped up in trying to fix everything with Celeste that you couldn't see what was happening to me. I paused. But I don't need your apology. Not right now. He nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't even expect you to come back home. But I want you to know. I've been talking to a counselor, trying to figure out how to be a better dad, how to be there. His voice faltered. For you. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. On one hand, it was a step in the right direction. But on the other hand, how could he expect me to just accept this now? After everything? So what's next? I asked, keeping my voice level. Are you going to ask me to come back home? Tell me everything's going to be fixed. No, he shook his head, his gaze steady. No, I'm not going to ask you to do that. I just want you to know that I'm here. If you ever want to talk. If you ever need anything. The words felt hollow. Like something that would have meant the world to me a year ago. But now? They didn't quite reach me. I'm not coming back home, Dad, I said, trying to make it clear. I can't. But I'm not going to shut you out either. I just need time. He looked like he was about to say something else, but the words got caught in his throat. Instead, he just nodded. Okay, he said softly. Okay. And that was it. We didn't hug. We didn't make any promises. We just sat there, two people who were still trying to figure out how to exist in each other's lives again. It wasn't a perfect moment. Hell, it wasn't even a comfortable one. But it was the first time in a long time I felt like I was being seen for who I really was, someone who had been hurt, but wasn't broken. Not completely. After he left, I sat there for a while longer, staring at the coffee in front of me. I knew that this wasn't the end. It wasn't even a resolution. But it was a start. I wasn't sure where it would take me, but I knew I was done hiding. Done pretending. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The next few weeks after my conversation with my dad were a blur. A strange, disorienting blur, filled with a mix of small victories and awkward moments. I felt like I was living two lives at once. One where I was making plans for my future and rebuilding the pieces of my life that Celeste and my dad had shattered, and another where I was still grappling with the aftermath of everything that had happened. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth doing ever is, right? I moved into my new apartment with my roommates, and though it was tiny, it felt like freedom. The first night I stayed there alone, I curled up in bed with a book, just letting the quiet wash over me. No crying kids downstairs, no stepmom acting like the house was a revolving door for her personal to-do list. Just peace. And it was everything I didn't know I needed. Elena checked in on me every other day. I wasn't sure if she was worried I'd slip back into my old habits, second-guessing myself and returning to the toxic environment, but whatever her reasons, I appreciated it. She was my rock through all of this, and her support meant the world. There were moments when I still missed my dad. Not the one I'd seen these last few years, but the one who'd used to braid my hair before picture day and laughed when I tried to teach him how to make pancakes. I didn't want to miss him anymore. But every so often, I'd find myself remembering those better days. Then I'd catch myself, tell myself that I wasn't going to let the past hold me back. I wasn't going to let him off the hook for his years of neglect. But it was hard to ignore the remnants of love that were still clinging to the broken pieces. Then, one evening, I got a text from my dad. It wasn't the usual vague, "How are you?" message. It was a full paragraph. "Harper, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know I've hurt you, and I understand why you don't want to come home, but I'm asking you, please, to give me a chance to make things right. I've already started looking at counseling, and I've started taking better care of myself. I know it's not going to fix things overnight, but if you'd be willing to meet again, I'd like to talk more. I miss you, Dad." I didn't know what to think when I saw the message. It wasn't just an apology. It was an attempt at accountability, something I hadn't seen from him in years. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to block his number, to just keep moving forward. But the other part, the part of me that had grown up wishing he'd fight for me, wanted to say yes. I didn't know if I could trust him yet, but I wasn't ready to close that door completely. The next morning, I texted him back. "I'll meet you tomorrow, but I need you to know, I'm not ready to come back. Not yet. But we can talk." The meeting was set. I wasn't nervous like I thought I'd be. I think, by that point, I had accepted the fact that this was going to be a slow process. No magic words, no sudden closure. Just more slow, methodical steps toward whatever version of our relationship might emerge. If it ever did. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, the sun barely peeking through the windows. He was already sitting at a table near the back, his back to me, staring out the window like he was lost in thought. I stood there for a second, taking him in, this man who was both my father and a stranger. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. But there was no turning back now. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. He looked different. We both did. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but something about this moment felt significant. Like we both knew this was a turning point. "Harper," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, sitting across from him. I didn't know how to begin, so I let him take the lead. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he started. "About everything. About how I failed you. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or ever, if that's not what you want. But I want to make sure you know that I'm trying. I'm really trying." It felt strange hearing him say it. Strange and raw. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. It wasn't enough to undo everything that had happened between us. I wasn't going to give him an easy out. He didn't deserve that. But for the first time, I felt like maybe he was finally hearing me. Truly hearing me. "I don't know where to go from here," I said softly, looking down at my coffee cup. "But I'm willing to try. I don't know what this looks like, but I'm willing to figure it out. For us." His face softened. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. It was tentative, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to touch me, but I didn't pull away. "I'll do whatever it takes, Harper," he said quietly. "I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight. But I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to make the same mistakes again." I didn't know if I believed him. I didn't know if I ever would. But for the first time, I could see a glimpse of the dad I used to know. The one who tried, who cared. And maybe that was enough to start with. The next few weeks were full of small, uncertain steps. We met up a couple more times, just talking about everything and nothing. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping apologies. But there was progress. We were moving forward, inch by inch, and that felt like a victory in itself. As for Celeste, she didn't reach out. Not once. She hadn't tried to call, hadn't sent me any more guilt-trippy texts. And honestly, That was a relief. It was like a door had slammed shut, and I didn't need to try to figure out how to walk through it anymore. She was a part of my past now, and that was where she was staying. One afternoon, I went to visit my dad at his apartment. It was small, but neat. He'd rearranged the furniture since I'd last been there, and there was a picture of me on his coffee table, the one from my high school graduation. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Hey, Dad," I said as I walked in. "How's it going?" He smiled, a little unsure of himself, but the smile was real. "It's going. I'm working on it, Harper. One step at a time." "Me too," I said, feeling a weight lift off my chest. "Me too." I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future again. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough.